But before I get to that, I was wondering, what did you mean by render? You've said that, I think, a few times now, and I hear that a lot with React, but what does it really mean? What does render mean? Oh, I love talking about rendering. But unfortunately, before we do that, we should talk about one more thing. And, well, okay, I say one more thing. It might be a few more things. But the first thing I want to talk about before we get into rendering is state. It's cool to create your own components, right? But I promise you, won't be very useful without state somewhere in your program. And state just means a way to store and retrieve information, basically. For example, with the calendar component that we were talking about, let's say you want to allow the user to page through months of the year. This means that somewhere you will need to store which month the user is currently viewing. So when your component renders, you know which days to render in the output for the user, right? React actually provides multiple mechanisms to do this. The simplest is what is called the useState hook. It sounds scary. I know. I can see you over there, Norris, sort of flipping out there as you slugs do sometimes. But I promise you, it's pretty easy to use, at least this hook. You can call the useState hook within your calendar component. You can set it up to give the name or index of the month that is currently being viewed, and you set it to a new value when the user clicks a button in your calendar, for example. The useState hook and the other hooks we haven't talked about yet are nothing fancy. They're really just JavaScript functions provided by the React library that got loaded when the browser loaded the React library code initially. Okay, wow, Thomas, I'm getting a bit lost. I don't understand. Why can't I just declare a variable like I would normally do in JavaScript and set that? Why do I need this weird hook thing? It sounds completely unnecessary. I thought I knew JavaScript. I don't understand. All right, yeah, you're right. That it would be your first instinct and it would feel the most natural. But this is where we start to get into the whole render thing. So remember how components are just functions that we've defined? Well, these functions should be programmed specially so that they don't have any direct side effects. React might actually call your function any number of times for various reasons. So if you used a global JavaScript variable to store your state, you could end up with very strange behavior. For your React code to work correctly, you must never modify global state within a React component except via the hook functions that React provides in its library. There's some small minor details to that statement, like using refs, and we're not going to get into that now. It's really not important. But the important part is that you use these hooks for managing state. And this ensures that your React program will work correctly. Your React components should always be what we call in the programming world, the computer science world, we call pure. Pure functions can transform their attributes and properties, their arguments and state to output JSX, but they can never affect anything outside of the function. You can think of pure functions and pure React components as tiny little isolated programs inside of your larger program. Okay, so to make sure my program works correctly, I need to make sure that my React components don't modify or read from any global variables. Am I getting that correct? Yes, you are right. You're quick at this, I'll be honest. That is correct. All right, so you're saying for storing the current month the user is viewing, I should not store that in a global variable that my component reads and sets, right? Yes, again, correct. Think about it this way. What if you wanted to use your calendar component in multiple places on the same page? How would you actually store state in a global variable? Would you create a new variable for every instance of your calendar on the page? How would that actually work? There are ways to make that work, but what if instead you use the state hooks provided by React, like useState? If you do this, React will take care of that for you. You don't need to worry about it. You can include as many calendar components on the page as you want, and you won't need to keep track of the state in some special way to make sure that one instance of your calendar component doesn't affect the state of another instance of your calendar component. You can just program the component like it lives in total isolation. I guess that makes some sense. So this hook and state mechanism allows me to program my components in an isolated way so that I can include as many as I want without having to worry about them interfering with each other. I mean, that's what it sounds like, right? Yeah, exactly right, Norris. That sounds a bit complicated, I'll be honest. But I guess I can see the advantage. Okay, I think I got that under my gill here. Does that now mean we are able to talk about rendering finally? I think we're very close to talking about rendering, but I want to cover two more things very quickly before we get into that. That is events and effects. So inside your components, you can set up events. Like, let's say when a user clicks a button, you can set up a click event on that button. Oftentimes inside of the handler for an event like that is where you will put your code that actually changes the state. So for example, if a user clicks the button to show the next month in the calendar, inside of the handler for that button's click event is where you would actually make the call with the useState hook to update the name of the month that the user is viewing. Once you do that, React will run your component code again, and your component will be like, oh, I'm supposed to be rendering May now instead of April, and it will render different days out to the screen in different orders or whatever it wants to do, right? Okay, so the event handlers sound a lot like the regular JavaScript that I would write where I set up on-click handlers. Yep. And the other thing to cover is effects. So sometimes you do need your components to have side effects. Like maybe they need to make a network call. Well, you can't just put this code directly in your React components because that would make them no longer pure and you'll start to get weird behavior and bugs. Instead, React provides another function called useEffect that you can call, that can include code that has actual side effects. By using the useEffect function, you are setting up your side effects in a structured way that allows React internally to handle that code specially so it doesn't create unexpected bugs for you. It sure seems like React does a lot of special handling for me. I can imagine I might use an event handler or useEffect to then submit the network request when a user actually buys a ticket then? Is that right? Yeah, that's exactly right. You can have side effects in event handlers or inside calls to useEffect. You can't put them in the regular main code path that you use to render the JSX output for what gets shown on the screen, but you can have side effects. They just need to be inside of event handlers or calls to useEffect.